Well, hello. My name is Erin Gruwell, and welcome to our Freedom Writers Giving Tuesday extravaganza. They say that good things happen in threes. So we had three lives scheduled for today, and this is our third. And I'm so giddy. I am so excited by our guest today that I've been waiting anxiously and impatiently all day for the third one to happen. So, let me tell you what we're going to do before I introduce our amazing guest. For those of you that are not aware, today, November 28th, is Giving Tuesday, and it is a day of what they call radical giving. And all of you that just went through the holidays here in America and came out with tryptophan and sleepiness from your turkey. You got up early on Friday and might have been a part of Black Friday, shopping to your heart's content. And then yesterday, Monday, is what they call Cyber Monday. Well, about a dozen years ago, philanthropists created what they call Giving Tuesday. And the idea is to get people thinking about paying it forward, thinking about giving and giving often, thinking about helping us help others. And so today we are doing just that. We are calling it our 30 for 30 campaign. 30 years ago, I met this amazing guest. 30 years ago, there was a moment that ended up making a movement. And for many of us, a mandate. 30 years ago, my life was turned upside down to be put right back together again. So I'm so excited to introduce all of you to our amazing guest, the OG of OGs, the original freedom writer, Melvin Logan. Welcome to the screen, Melvin.
Hey, you guys. Good evening. Good evening.
Well,
Happy Giving Tuesday.
Happy Giving Tuesday. What I want to say is we've already got some donations. We've only been in our live setting for about 5 minutes. And I want to read off some donations that already came in. So for those of you that are feeling philanthropic, for those of you that want to give and pay it forward, I'm going to throw out a number, and then I want you to put it in context. $30 for 30 years. That's like 4 or 5 fruity drinks at Starbucks. You know, if you add a little whipped cream and a bigger size. It is a meal if you go out to a restaurant. If you stay home and work, it's gas for the week. Maybe gas one way somewhere here in California because our gas is kind of expensive. But for $30, we're asking you to donate for our cause. So I want to say thank you for 3 people who donated as we were pushing the word go. Many of you were with us on our last Giving Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific. Carlos, amazing freedom writer Carlos, donated at our 9 o'clock hour, donated at our 3 o'clock hour, and he also is donating at our 6 o'clock hour. So he's donating $90, $30 3 times for our Giving Tuesday. Because she's unbelievably competitive, freedom writer Sue Ellen, who is in that photograph behind my shoulder and Melvin's shoulder. Sue Ellen is on the cover of our book. She donated twice. She might get competitive and she might not want to be outdone by Carlos, but she has donated twice today. She donated before and she just donated at our 3 o'clock hour. So who knows if Melvin inspires her, she might donate again. Oh, and it looks like sweet Zach from Indiana, who is a new minted freedom writer teacher from this summer, just donated $30. And I saw that you RSVP'd Zach to come to our symposium this March, and you're bringing your mom. We got to meet your dad, and I'm thrilled that we now get to meet your mom. So for those 3 folks in our family, thank you for donating. And as this hour progresses, I'll tell you what that $30 is going to do. So, like I said, it's just $30. Just don't go to Starbucks for a couple days. Eat cereal instead of scrambled eggs. You know, just tighten up a little bit, and that $30 will make all of the difference in the world. Melvin, speaking of making all of the difference in the world, what I'm really excited about is I don't think any of us would be here. I don't think freedom writers would be a movement. I don't think there would be a book and a movie and a documentary if it wasn't for you. And 30 years ago, in the fall of 1993, I was a clueless student teacher, and you were the big man on campus. And crash, boom, bam, our worlds collided. So throughout this hour, I'm going to talk about how you are the catalyst. And for those of you that believe in moments of divinity or serendipity, I think what happened in my class was as it should be. I think it's bigger than both of us. It's bigger than all of us. And so throughout this hour, we're going to be going back and dabbling with what you did, unbeknownst to you, that would create this movement for 30 years. So, how does it feel to have the same English teacher for 30 years in a row? Are you sick of me yet?
I can't say I'm sick of you, but I'm definitely getting new lessons every day. You're still teaching me how to be a better person. So I'm grateful for it. You know, how many people can say that their high school English teacher has followed them a lifetime, you know?
Well, I'm so honored that Melvin, along with all of the speakers you've seen today, Tony was this morning, Carlos was this afternoon, Melvin this evening. It's like the band of brothers, and we have like a bat phone. A signal will go out, something is happening in the world, and we jump in my little Prius. Rob told me my Prius sounds like a lawnmower, but we jump in my Prius and off we go to serve students and teachers. And Thursday, you and Tony and I are going to be with a group of students at one of our favorite high schools in Moreno Valley, Canyon Springs.
Yeah.
And what I have noticed every time you are standing in a classroom, on a stage, in an auditorium, first and foremost, you can hear a pin drop. First and foremost, kids are leaning in and listening. But your cadence and your alliteration, as an English teacher, your alliteration and the way that you put together a story is spellbinding. And you do it extemporaneously. You don't have notes. You don't have a teleprompter. You don't have someone whispering in your ear. It's from the heart. So for the ability to stand in front of a group of students who are rapt and listening, where does that skill set come from when you were telling your story and you can literally hear a pin drop?
You know, I wouldn't necessarily call it a skill set. What I would call it is sincerity. When I speak to these kids, I want to give them my best. I want them to feel inspired. I want to give them words to encourage them. I want them to leave feeling like they can do anything. And I think that's where it comes from. You know, this is not a script, or we're not in a movie. I don't need notes because I'm talking about my life. I'm talking about my experiences and how those experiences have shaped me into the person that I am today. Some of those experiences were good. Some of those experiences were bad, but the mix of them is the commonality of who I am now.
Mm. Well, a little later, we're going to be sharing a little bit of the story that you wrote for the Freedom Writers Diary. I can't wait for people to hear it. It is so poetic and it's so profound. So I hope those of you that join us stick around for the whole hour because you're not going to want to miss a minute of this. And I see that Nancy Rodriguez just popped into our chat room. So hello to the Rodriguez family. Nancy, what you need to know is your beautiful daughter, Brianna, joined us this morning. Melvin was watching this morning, and Melvin wrote something beautiful that he wanted her to feel his hugs because Brianna donated to our cause. And I just thought that was such a beautiful sentiment that I actually shared it with everybody on our 9:00 hour this morning. So welcome, welcome, welcome. So when I have the privilege and the honor to be with you, Freedom Writers, this incredible band of brothers and sisters, brothers from other mothers, and in our last live, Carlos referred to me as Mama.
Yeah.
Is often I talk about the origin story because I think when you think of superheroes, whether they're DC Comics or Marvel characters, they all have an origin story. And that's what makes people root for them. Overcoming those obstacles, triumph over tragedy. And I think what's really important for those that are tuning in now is to know a little bit about your origin story. And I think what's really important is we're going to paint a picture with a video in a moment about how dicey it was. We asked Freedom Riders to give us photographs and video footage from 1992, which was the Rodney King verdict,
Yeah.
followed by the racial reckoning and the Los Angeles riots. And you were in the epicenter of them. And so the footage that we had, we compiled into a documentary. And that's where I wanted to start our viewers today. I want them to see the grit. I want them to see the chaos, the fires that were burning, the ash that was bellowing in the air, and knowing as a teenage boy before you walked into my English class, this was your reality. Dodging bullets and burying friends. And so what I'd love to do is show this segment, Melvin, and then I want to come back on the other side and I want you to kind of explain the images that we are seeing are actually the images that you lived. And I'd love you to add some more layers to that. So let's take a little glimpse into our documentary. And then I want you to think about how you could paint a picture with words of the images that we're not seeing that are actually part of your DNA.
I could die today. God damn, I could die today. For nothing. For nothing. For being in this car and being at the stoplight at the wrong time. I could die today for nothing. I could die for the chain on my neck. I could die for the earrings in my ear. I could die for the money that's not even in my pocket. I could die today.
The Freedom Rider story began in April of 1992. The Rodney King verdict had just been announced. I was in my early 20s. At that time, I was living in Newport Beach, this safe, idyllic seaside community. And I turned on my television, and just 30 minutes from where I lived, people were looting, there were riots.
The skies of Los Angeles are black with smoke from at least 150 fires deliberately set. Thousands of people went on a rampage, a riot, still angry about the verdict in the Rodney King beating trial.
One of the things that really concerned me was seeing children. It made me realize that children, they listen and they watch, and adults become these role models. Watching that unfold and seeing those teenagers and seeing that angst and that anger, something happened, and I realized I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a teacher in an area where those young people that were so angry were doing what I saw on television. I guess I believe the cliche that education can equalize a very unfair playing field. So I chose to teach English at Wilson High in Long Beach.
So Melvin, that's just a 2-minute montage of what you and fellow Freedom Riders experienced between 1992 and 1993. And before you walked into my class 30 years ago, there was 126 homicides in your community following that racial reckoning. So take our viewers back to that origin story. The images we just saw were pretty intense, probably pale in comparison to what you actually lived.
30 years ago, that was the boiling point. Right before the Rodney King verdict, there was an escalation in gang violence. Where I lived, you had your Crips and your East Side Longos and your Stoners. And right around that time, the Crips and the East Side Longos were going at it. And there was a green light. If you don't know what a green light is, that's when a rival gang puts a green light out for you. So that basically means if we see you, we're going to shoot you. And the green light was for any black male in a white t-shirt. And so every day, we were looking over our shoulders. Every car that drove by, we kind of ducked down and we were waiting for the next drive-by to come by. A couple of my friends had already been shot. We had been chased down the street. We had been chasing other people. It was crazy. It was crazy back then. And when you're, 15, 16 years old, and when you're young and we live in that bubble, that was our world. We couldn't really see anything outside of that. We hadn't seen anything outside of that. This is where we grew up. This is where we lived. And, what's sad is at 16 years old, I was already desensitized to the idea of violence. You know, we expected it to happen.
You, Tony, and Carlos throughout today's lives have all used similar words like it was normal. You were a little bit more sophisticated and you said desensitized. But when you become numb to something that is not normal, what does that mean? Did you feel like you had a bullseye in your chest? Did you go to funeral after funeral? What is that like when it becomes normal and you are desensitized?
And when I look back at it and I say, yeah, it was normal. That was how we lived. If you wanted to get to school in one piece, you knew what to do and what not to do. You knew which street to go down. You know what alley not to go through. You could look on the walls and see the graffiti and know which territory you're in. And to us, if we made it to school that day, that was a good day. If we didn't get into a fight, waiting on the public bus, that was a good day. So this is something that was happening to us all the time. I wore the uniform. I knew what the other gangs were. I knew if I wore that uniform that I was going to be a target. But we were just so young and so dedicated to the hood. This is my street.
I'm going to say something that might make you burst into tears, and I love when you do. We just got a donation from your son, Matthew Logan, just donated, and as a scholarship recipient, we're going to see at the end of this amazing live. Maybe we should stop right now as I'm talking about your son. Let's see your son who just graduated from high school. And you've done, oh, look at him. He's so handsome, just like you, and your wife is gorgeous. There is your beautiful wife, your son on graduation day. This is at our symposium when we gave him a scholarship. When you see your son and you realize you've told young students before, you wouldn't even let your son ride a bus. Yeah. You didn't even want your son to go to a 7-Eleven. You sheltered your son so that he didn't have to go through what you went through, which was the gauntlet getting himself to school. You sure did something right for your sweet son to donate. How does that make you feel?
It does. And thank you, son. I love you so much. And that was a nice surprise because he has his own bank account, so he can spend. So thank you, Matthew. That's awesome.
Wow.
But yeah, we did shelter him, my wife and I. Hayasi. We did shelter him. And my wife and I both lived in neighborhoods that, we were afraid to let our son go outside. I remember when my son was younger, he was maybe about 11 years old, and he was out playing. And one of the older kids came up to him and was trying to bully him and pulled a screwdriver on him. There were times that I was out with my wife and my son while we were still in those neighborhoods, and there was a gun pulled on us. And, I got my wife behind me, my son in one hand, and this guy has a gun in front of us. I didn't want my son to go through what we went through. So I did shelter him. You're right. I don't want him to walk to 7-Eleven. And I'm I'm almost more feel fearful for him now because I think as we get older, I guess we didn't necessarily see back then, but things have gotten a lot crazier in the neighborhoods that we grew up in. The murders haven't stopped; they've only risen. The violence hasn't stopped, and like I said, I wanted better for him, and I'm very proud of him.
Wow.
Really proud.
Well, I keep harping on this, the trifecta of three. So I want to give credit to Matthew, your son, because there's been three more donations since I mentioned him. So I want to do a sweet shout out to Nancy Rodriguez, following in the footsteps of your son and her daughter Brianna earlier today. Nancy donated $100. Sweet Freedom Writer Charisse, not to be outdone by Carlos and Sue Ellen, she just donated $30. Thank you, Charisse. And Zach, who donated earlier, Freedom Writer teacher from Indiana, just donated again, and this time on behalf of his mother. So I want to give all of that credit to your son, who was watching his father, and I hope he's as proud as we are. My father used to say that he was so proud he felt like his heart was going to leap out of his chest. And I think when we watched you speak on your son's behalf, when we gave him a scholarship this June at the symposium, and you were just weeping, I don't think there was a dry eye in the house.
Yeah.
And I love that when we have those moments, oftentimes with young men who've been suspended, young men who've been expelled, and you go there and you get choked up, and sometimes there are those crocodile tears. I love that you are vulnerable. I love that you're exposed, and I love that these men that have had to put up their dukes their whole life and swing first and swing fast, in that moment with a tear from you, they can actually breathe. So
Yeah.
what is it like when you have those moments, whether it's the messy cry over your son, whether it's recounting some of the stories you survived as a teenager? What is it like when you stop being hard and you can be tender?
One of the things when we speak in front of people that we as freedom riders have to do is we have to rehash a lot of our trauma. And sometimes when you're talking about that trauma, those feelings come back. And that's why sometimes I do get choked up. But it's also therapy. A lot of times, young Black men, young Hispanic men don't have the resources to go speak to a psychologist or a psychiatrist about past traumas. And we all have them. If you lived in the neighborhood that I lived in, you had trauma, whether you recognize it or not. And what speaking in front of these kids does for me is it gives me a chance to talk about my trauma. Also, when I look out into the crowd and I see those young faces, I see myself, I see my son, I see the Freedom Riders kids. And I want so much to have an impact on them that's positive. I want so much for them to take something away from what I said to them. And I speak with love and I speak from my heart. And when I'm speaking to them and I choke up or I tear, that's my heart open. Imagine like a dark circle around the heart, and as you start to speak, that circle begins to open up. And by the time I get through speaking to those kids, that circle is gone. So, like I said, it's therapy for me.
I love that. I want to show the scene from the movie. I think they did such a beautiful rendition of the moment I refer to as our crash boom bam. And I want to talk about the trifecta at that time, which was an act of bullying, someone who was bullied,
Yeah.
and a bystander. And oftentimes those roles are interchangeable. People that were bullied can become the bully. Sometimes the bystander jumps in. And so with those three, it was you, it was Sherrod, and it was Carlos. And I did not know then that the three of you would become the best of friends. I did not know then that you would be part of this catalyst that has grown. And I didn't realize it would give you such great street credibility with kids to have not only lived it, but to take accountability. And so in the feature film, what we see is that the note, and it's a little deceptive because it looks like the Hispanic student who's actually portraying Carlos actually drew it. And as you know, Carlos was a tagger. He went from writing on walls to signing checks now that he's a businessman. But in that scene, it almost looks like he was the one drawing it. So it was that element of racism, Latino against an African American. In reality, it was you. And I mentioned it this morning. I think it was actually an act of chivalry. I had heard about all three of you in the teacher's lounge. All three of you at some point had been kicked out of a middle school. And so you were on the watch list.
Yeah.
And Sherrod had come to me from a rival high school, Polly, and had threatened a previous English teacher with a gun. You were one of the captains of the football team, and here's this showboat showing up to school wearing a Polly jersey. So that was like fighting words just to begin with.
Yeah.
And with Carlos, you talked about the green light earlier. He was not part of East Side Longos. He was in TK. But oftentimes taggers were misconstrued based on what they wore and the color of their skin of being in a gang as well. So he was dodging bullets at the same time you were. So something happened. Sherrod had been moved. He was always cutting up. And with your pen, you became a Picasso. And I don't think you were a Picasso of the modern era solely with your art, but it was the ramifications of what that art led to and created. So I want to show this scene. And what I have loved doing with you beside me in schools is the conversation we have after this scene. And I can't wait to have that conversation. And I can't wait for folks to hear a sample of the story that you wrote to Sherrod as an apology. So let's check out that scene, which is a reenactment of that note. And then I want you to talk about what it's like to know that that was the moment, that was the epicenter where everything began for the Freedom Riders.
I don't have page 4. That's run out.
Okay, why don't you just use the next blank page? What's going on? What is that? Give it to me. What is this?
Just leave it alone.
You think this is funny? Tito, would this be funny if it were a picture of you?
It ain't.
Close the workbooks. Maybe we should talk about art. Tito's got real talent, don't you think? You know something? I saw a picture just like this once in a museum. Only it wasn't a black man. It was a Jewish man. And instead of the big lips, he had a really big nose, like a rat's nose. But he wasn't just one particular Jewish man. This was a drawing of all Jews. And these drawings were put in the newspapers by the most famous gang in history. You think you know all about gangs? You're amateurs. This gang would put you all to shame. And they started out poor and angry, and everybody looked down on them until one man decided to give them some pride, an identity, and somebody to blame. Take over neighborhoods?
That's nothing compared to them. They took over countries. And you want to know how? They just wiped out everybody else. Yeah, they wiped out everybody they didn't like and everybody they blamed for their life being hard. And one of the ways they did it was by doing this. See, they'd print pictures like this in the newspapers. Jewish people with big, long noses. Blacks with big, fat lips. They'd also publish scientific evidence that proved Jews and blacks were the lowest form of human species. Jews and blacks were more like animals. And because they were just like animals, it didn't really matter whether they lived or died. In fact, life would be a whole lot better if they were all dead. That's how a Holocaust happens. You're raising your hand?
The thing that you said before. The Holocaust?
Holocaust, yes.
What is that?
Raise your hand if you know what the Holocaust is. Raise your hand if anyone in this classroom has ever been shot at.
Gives me chills. It gives me chills. You were there, and you drew that note, and I don't think that if I had sent you away, or Sherrod or Carlos, that we would be here 30 years later. I don't think that your beautiful son would be donating. I mean, that's such a reflection of you, Melvin. I see that Sue Ellen wrote in the chat room, Melvin, we're so proud of you. These are your sisters and your brothers who have seen the way you have raised your family. So you drew a note, not knowing where it would lead, but in reflection, how does that make you feel that in that moment, something was created because it was bigger than ourselves?
You know, when I drew that note, I had no idea that we would be talking about it 30 years later. When I drew that note, I was being a jerk. I mean, bottom line, that was it. And that one spark, that catalyst that you taught into that teaching moment has been a lifelong lesson for me. I've said it and I'll say it again. The Freedom Riders are 150. There's no one Freedom Rider that started anything. The Freedom Riders are us. Like I said, every single diary entry in that book, we know who they are. When we wrote that book, we didn't know. And we have grown up. And I still remember the day where we were like, well, you know, I'm diary entry number 70. And I'm like, wow, you know, and that was 25, 30 years ago. You know, we weren't able to do that till after we graduated. But I'm proud to say that I had a hand in creating this movement. You know, if you look over my shoulders, you'll see Freedom Rider books. And one of the things that I am most proud about from the Freedom Rider series is the Dear Freedom Rider. These are kids that were inspired by our stories. It's just amazing. It's a surreal feeling to even be in front of everyone today, still talking about that picture. But that picture allowed me to get a better life. I don't think I would be here right now if I hadn't met that fork in the road. I can almost guarantee that, that fork on the road, that picture, that moment, that when you asked us about the Holocaust, and you asked us, how many people in the classroom have been shot at. And I remember that day. I remember us pulling our shirts up and showing where we got cut by knives. I remember that day distinctly. Um, and that was a fork in the road. That was the fork that I could have gone left or I could have gone right. And on one path was a path to having a better life, having a better state of mind, um, having a family. Um, the other path was going to lead to a jail cell, or either me shooting someone or someone shooting me. And till this day, I'm grateful that you didn't send me out of the class.
I think of one of the poems that I shared with your class was Robert Frost, uh, Two Roads, and the line, two roads diverged, and I took the road less traveled by. And when you mentioned fork in the road, I think we all followed you on that fork. We were onto something. We didn't have a master plan. We still don't. But I think that we trusted the universe, as crazy as that sounds, to follow. And one of the things I'd love to share is when we were reflecting on the 20th anniversary edition of the book, it was getting the band back together. We've never been apart, but getting the band back together to write stories of the now, reflecting on stories of the then. And I think that your story, the first story in the 20th anniversary edition, is so profound. And I love when we read it. We're actually going to read it on Thursday with a group of students. What I'd love to do is we just did a little minute rendition of your story, and I want people to lean in, because you do get a little choked up. When you're acknowledging what you did, you can feel the lump in your throat. So if you'll humor me, I'd love to share that story with the audience. It's so beautifully written. It's so profound. I can't wait Thursday morning when we pass out the paragraphs and everyone puts their hand in the air. And then when it's their turn to read your story, each and every one of them proudly stands up and reads it aloud. It is so beautiful and like harmonious. So let's listen to you reading it. And then I want to talk about what it's like for you to know that it is in the hands of schools and kids and students.
Hi guys, my name is Melvin Logan. I am one of the original Freedom Riders, and I will be reading Diary 1. Even though it's been over 2 decades since I drew that stupid picture, I remember that day in the drawing just like it was yesterday. But the thing I remember most clearly is the look on Miss G's face when she finally got a hold of it. I can still remember her bright red cheeks and the terrible look of disappointment in her eyes. I certainly never thought of what the consequences of bullying Sherrod might be. It's been 2 decades since I drew that stupid picture. I never got a chance to apologize for it. So here's my chance. I'm sorry. I apologize with all my heart for drawing that stupid picture. I'm not proud of what I did, but that picture sparked an idea. That idea started a movement of its own, the Freedom Riders. And 20 years later, the Freedom Riders are still together and still changing the world one word at a time.
It chokes me up. So you read it aloud to students, or they volunteer to read it. What is it like to either read it and or hear it and know that it is your truth, your narrative?
I really get touched by it when the kids read it. So what we do, if you don't know, when we go to the schools, we have these little cards, and they have paragraphs on them. And there's about maybe 12 cards that we'll hand out. So we'll hand them out to the kids, and they're popcorning as they read. It's surreal to me, these are my words in a book published, 20 years later. And the fact that I got to write down where I am 20 years later, as opposed to when the Freedom Riders first started, um, it's amazing. It's amazing. And one thing I never ever did, shout out Sherrod, is I never apologized to him. If you haven't read the book, the very next diary entry after that is Calvin, which is Sherrod's brother. And he responds to me like, how could he do that to my brother? Who is this guy, and who does he think he is? And I remember we were sitting down in our war room at the foundation, and we were back to the basics, editing and writing, and I'm sitting next to Calvin, and we exchanged to edit, and it blew me back. It really dawned on the effect that you can have on people when you really don't even know. I can't imagine how he felt, you know, um, the day that I drew that. Sherrod and I were bumping heads. Like you said, he was from a rival school, and your words, your tongue, how you treat people has an effect. It has a lasting effect, and we really don't realize it at the time. Um, but I'm glad something that I did in malice was used for something beautiful. You know.
I want to do something beautiful right now. And your son has inspired us all to give. And if you're just joining us, this is our 30 for 30 campaign on Giving Tuesday. And once Melvin's son, who just graduated from high school in the summer, once he donated, it was like this onslaught. So I've been watching the thread. I'm too nervous to type because I'm more engrossed in you. But there's been a beautiful young man who joined us when Carlos was live and a couple hours ago, and he's been wrapped with you ever since. And he's been asking a lot of questions. I know he's familiar with the film. He's been asking questions about my ex-husband and my dad, all of whom you know and knew. And so on behalf of you and your son, I'm going to send him a book. So if those of you in the chat room can get Joseph's information, Joseph, Melvin and I are going to sign a book and we're going to send it to you because a lot of those questions you've had hopefully will be answered in the pages of a book. And then you can go back and you can read Melvin's story in its entirety, and you can go back and read Carlos's story in its entirety. And so if Joseph, you could reach out to our team, we'll get your address, and it'll be Christmas come early. How about that? We will send you a book for the holidays. What I have loved when we're together, Melvin, is the art of having a secret stash of books.
Yeah.
And then finding the perfect kid in the room or the teacher or whomever and just giving them a book. What has that been like for you? It's like almost like an Oprah moment when she was like, you get a car and you get a car. It's just a book. But what has that been like for you to pass out a book to someone and know they're going to go home and read it?
I almost feel bad sometimes when we pass out the books because sometimes we don't have enough for everybody. But when the kids are jumping up with their arms out, me, and you walk over and give them those books. The last time that we went to a school, there's a couple of kids that stood out. We went to a high school and spoke to some freshmen, and of course there was an audience, but in the very back row, there was these three kids.
Oh, I remember this.
And I asked one of the administrators there, I was like, what's going on with those guys? And he said, oh, they're on a disciplinary in class suspension, so they have to go wherever I go. They're not really here as part of the assembly. And those kids are my favorite type of kids because I'm one of those kids. I was the kid who got kicked out of my history class for asking questions like, well, if the Middle East is, Egypt is not Africa, it's the Middle East. Well, where's the Middle West? Boom, kicked right out. Math teacher who just put my desk outside. I'm going to give you a C, but I don't want you to come into class. I don't want to talk. I'm going to put your desk right here. You sit here for the whole period. So I was that kid. So the first thing I did was snatch a couple books and put them to the side for him. And I wanted to give those kids the books and the looks on their faces, because they weren't necessarily part of what was going on. They were so surprised. And before we finished speaking, there were two boys and a girl, and the girl had already finished reading the first chapter of the Ford, and she already gotten all the way to the fifth diary entry before we finished speaking.
You know, I have to apologize to you because the assembly was for freshmen, and we had a box of books, so 24 books, and we were just gonna see if a couple people wanted them. We probably needed 300 books.
Yeah.
And you had come up to me and you had told me about these three kids, and you asked, and I have learned to ask for forgiveness, not permission. You asked for permission, and you said, "Can I give it to these three kids?" And I knew they weren't freshmen, and at first I said no, and then I knew you would give it to them anyway. So I was like, of course.
Yeah.
I want you to know, watching those three kids who had entered the auditorium in shame, when they left, they were like levitating. They were like rock stars because they were part of the 24 kids in this enormous auditorium that were handpicked by you to get a book. It was indescribable. It was better than Christmas.
Yeah.
It was better than, a stocking stuffer. It was real, because not only did you give them the book, you then signed the book. And it was that acknowledgement, like, you can write what needs to be written too. So what is that like when you write a special message to a kid?
I try to do my best to individualize them. But when you see these kids' faces, and what amazes me is how many of the kids say, well, I saw the movie. That's my favorite movie. And then they see you in front of you. I think what that book does is it captures it kind of puts us in a time capsule, so when people are reading it, they're reading it in real time, and they're using their imagination to imagine what we look like, what we sound like, and then when we can see them, here we are 30 years later. I got gray hairs.
So do I.
It's kind of cool for them to actually put a face to what they see. And a lot of times they're shocked. Like when we first walk in, people are expecting to see, teenagers, because that's what they read about. And we go in and we tell them, listen, yeah, I'm an original freedom writer. And wow, and their eyes just get so big, especially the junior high school kids. It's almost like being a rock star.
You know what I want to share, because we got a very special donation, and it reminds me of when I gave you guys the Diary of Anne Frank. Anne Frank sadly didn't make it. She died at Bergen-Belsen at the age of 15. So she's always going to be that image of youth. And like you said, on the cover of a book, all of you are teenagers, and then suddenly you're standing in front of students today, and you're a husband, you're a father, you're a community member who stands up for the little guy. And so what I have loved is, in this journey, when we couldn't meet Anne Frank, we met incredible Holocaust survivors. Mm-hmm. And 30 years ago, we went to the Museum of Tolerance and met our first group of Holocaust survivors. Mm-hmm. Well, a beautiful daughter of Dutch survivors, a dear friend of ours, Margaret Pollock, just donated $150.
Thank you.
And a very sweet story about Margaret is her mother went to the Montessori with Anne Frank, and they were in the very last train leaving Westerbork, which was the camp that took people to either Bergen-Belsen or Auschwitz. And her father and mother collectively started Anne Frank USA. And we were the recipients of the Spirit of Anne Frank Award. So I say this to you, Melvin, because you have met Holocaust survivors. Margaret's father lived to be 101, I believe. Renee Firestone is 99, about to turn 100 on April 13th. Can you imagine that you're going to be telling your story until you were 99 years old? Because that is the legacy that Jack and Ina Pollock did their entire lives. That is what Renee Firestone has done her entire life. So can you imagine telling your story using the power of words and not weapons until you're in your 90s?
Yeah, I hope we make it to C90. Fingers crossed. But what I can say is our words are permanently embedded in history. They're not going to be words that are going to be wasted. They're not going to be words that nobody can hear. They won't be echoes in some past life or past world. They're in a book, and that's permanent. You can go to any bookstore. You can still buy that book. You can order it online. And when I'm dead and gone and my son has grandchildren, that book will still be on his shelf. And he can hand that down to his kids and so forth and so on. That's the beauty of the Freedom Writer's Diary. We captured moments in our lives on pens and paper, and that paper was transferred to some old rinky-dink box computer that we started working on, and it's forever now.
I want to share with you and invite your entire family, your gorgeous wife, your brilliant son. 30 years ago, there was a note, and then we went to the Museum of Tolerance, and we're gonna show that scene from the movie in a moment. But 30 years ago, the Museum of Tolerance opened their doors, and 30 years ago, we showed up, and we've been going back for 30 years. Nearly every teacher that we have trained has gone with us to the Museum of Tolerance, one of which just donated $30. So thank you, Irene. And so on February 18th, they have invited us as a 30-year celebration to have all of the original Freedom Writers, your husbands and wives, your sons and daughters, and all of our network, our teachers, their sons and daughters, anyone on this call who may or may not live in California. We're going to go and spend the day there together. And a culmination at 2:00 is going to be a viewing of the feature film Freedom Writers. So I want to show this scene. And I want you on the other side of this clip to talk about what that's going to be like to go through the museum 30 years later, holding your wife's hand and holding your son's hand, and realizing that when they opened their doors, we were some of their first guests, and to be invited back. And they're actually opening the museum just for us that day. It's a Sunday. So they're opening the doors to celebrate you, to celebrate the connection that we've had. And so I want you to think about what it's going to be like to return on Sunday, February 18th with your wife and son in tow. So let's check out that scene and think about what it's going to be like with your family.
At the beginning of the tour, they give you a card with the child's picture on it. You can find out who they were and what camp they were sent to. And at the end of the tour, you can find out if they survived. I got a little girl from Italy.
Crystal Night, they called it. The night of broken glass. Hundreds of synagogues looted and burned. More than 7,000 Jewish stores destroyed. Over 100 Jews killed. Thousands.
Small center for children in Lisieux, in the French province of Ain. Among the children deported that day to Birkenau was 11-year-old Liliane Berenstein, who before leaving left behind a letter to God.
My little boy died. He got off the train and they killed him. I don't know why it bothered me so much. I've seen death all my life. But this little boy was only 5.
So I want you to envision what it's going to be like all these years later to be back at that place where we started, to hopefully have your son and your wife go, and to open up the door for our community, for the teachers we serve, their sons and daughters. And while you're talking about that, I want to put up another picture of your wife and your son. I want people to think about what it's going to be there. Oh, look at that. What is it going to be like for you, Melvin, to be their teacher that day, to 30 years later, to continue to pay it forward?
You know, I remember that day. You know, you guys see it in the movie, but we lived that. That was the first time that we actually learned about what the Holocaust really was about. And in that scene, they're actually sitting on some benches inside a replica of a gas chamber. And then there was 2 doors in the front, you know, bodied, able-bodied and children. That story, it still brings me to tears to know that those type of atrocities were happening. And to take my family back with me to where it all began, because as much as it's an origin story for the Freedom Riders, it's origin story of my family. That's part of the origin story for me and my wife and my son. You know, I get to take you back to that fork in the road, on that road less traveled, and show you, you know, these are the footsteps that I took when I was 16, 17 years old. It just brings me back, you know, to Schindler's List, when you took us to go see Schindler's List. And, you know, that movie blew my mind, and I still can't get that little red dress out of my mind. And I want to share that with my family.
I can't wait. Well, I am so honored that you have been a part of this journey for 30 years. I think you are going to be around for another 30, if not more. I have loved watching your son become this gentleman, this scholar. I can't wait for him to be an intern with us and to travel to schools and see you in action. I'd love to see your son watch you interacting with the teachers that we train. It's exquisite. There's a gift that you have, and it's a gift that you pay forward. So I want to thank everybody who has tuned in throughout the day and come back for a second or third time. I want to thank everybody who has donated, some of you a second or third time, like Carlos. And I really want to say thank you once again to your son, Melvin. That's amazing. You know, I don't know how many teenagers watch their parents. Oftentimes teenagers are like too close for school. But the fact that your son has been watching you, and the fact that your son used his own finances to donate for this cause is indescribable to me. It is the gift that keeps giving.
So I just want to say thank you to everyone, and thank you, son. This is a real experience. It's an honor to be amongst Freedom Riders. It's an honor to be welcomed back to the Museum of Tolerance. It's an honor to walk into these classrooms and been given the opportunity to try to give words of wisdom to help our youth community. So please, the hashtag's not going anywhere. Please continue to donate even when the live stream ends. You can give on Wednesday, you can give on Thursday, you can give on Friday. Those donations keep us going so that we can continue to spread our message of love and through education and awareness.
My final plug is for those of you that want more. I want more. I spent the whole day with Tony, Carlos, and now Melvin. They were recently all interviewed for our podcast, and we have deliberately made a podcast that is commercial free. So if you want more, if you're nosy like me and you want more, please go to our website and find our podcast. An incredible episode of Melvin's will be coming out in mid-December. If you saw us this morning with Tony, his will make you weep, and Carlos's will be out in January. But I'm so proud of everyone that joined us. I'm so proud of all of our family, near and wide. I can't wait to send Joseph a book signed by you and I, Melvin. So don't leave the office. We're going to sign that book for Joseph and stick it in the mail. For everyone else, continue to give of your time and your talent and your treasure to nonprofits. Nonprofits like ours take every single cent and we pay it forward to those that we humbly serve. So thank you for allowing us to humbly serve you today. If you want a little more, go to our website and listen and watch and be a part of it. And we thank every single one of you for spending the last hour with us. Thank you.